And again, just want to welcome you all to the RAAC training series, um, Compassionate Interventions to Support Engagement and Learning. And we have Dr. Kate Doyle with us presenting on increasing engagement for students with ASD. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
All right, thanks, Sadie. So my first slide is a thank you. Thank you for being here. I saw a list of some of the attendees, and I know some of you, and I know you have long days and have been working hard. And I was talking to Sadie prior to this, and I said, do you think we should do some breakout groups? And I was like, you know what? At 3:30, after I taught all day, I'm tired, so I might just want to listen and relax. If I told Sadie, after this presentation, if there's some times you would like to get together and chat, I am always happy to do that. My email will be at the end. Feel free to reach out, or if we want to organize something where we talk a little bit more about things, that would be a really great opportunity as well. So thank you for being here. Please relax and just sit back and listen. If you're in your car driving home, that's great too. We're just glad that you're here. I know that there is a really wide variety of experience within the teachers and caregivers and staff who are attending here. So for those of you who are veterans and have been doing it for a long time, I don't know if I'm going to share anything that's going to rock your world. However, I was sharing with Sadie when I was preparing for this, it was helpful for me to revisit some ideas. I was like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about this in a while. So hopefully it'll jog some ideas of things that maybe you haven't thought about in a while. And those of you who are new in the field, this will probably feel like a lot of information. So, if you can just take one strategy away from this and think about implementing it for the rest of your school year, that is great as well. So just really excited you're here and care about supporting engagement for with students with autism out in our school settings. All right, so why is academic engagement important? Academic engagement is critical for the success of all students. And in fact, IDEA emphasizes having high expectations and active engagement as critical factors for student learning achievement. So yeah, it's kind of like no duh, right? Like you have to be engaged to be able to learn. But we know that sometimes for someone with an autism spectrum disorder, that profile looks a little different, and we need to be intentional and thoughtful on how we engage these students. So increased engagement equals increased learning. And then what else should be on here is increased engagement equals increased learning and decreased maladaptive behaviors. So the more that we can get students engaged in their day, we're going to see less of those maladaptive behaviors across the day. So just a couple things to think about when you are planning for a student with ASD in your setting or in your classroom. We're going to talk briefly just about cognitive theories in terms of cognitive profiles of people with ASD, as well as talk about communication. If you understand these ideas, you can be more intentional in your planning in your classroom. So there's kind of three big cognitive profiles that are out there in the literature when thinking about with autism. And they're theories, right? So you don't have to subscribe to any of these, or maybe one, you find one more interesting or relevant to the work that you're doing. All in all, to say that when you have someone on the spectrum in your classroom, they are processing information and the environment differently than a neurotypical person is, right? Sometimes when you have any type of behaviors or disengagement, it's not because the person doesn't want to be compliant or be successful in school. They are really just taking in the information in a different way than perhaps you are or how you think you're delivering it. So one of those theories is that there's differences in theory of mind. And this is a theory that individuals with autism have differences in understanding that other people have their own plans, thoughts, and points of view. They may struggle with understanding that you have a different belief system or attitudes or emotions. They might really think that we are all thinking the same thing in this situation, and that someone has a different perspective is not in their mind at that time. So that is a different theory of mind. Sometimes it's referred to as mind blindness, but you can see why this could impact a student in the classroom. Like they are thinking that, Oh, I hear my favorite song over there on that iPad that someone else has, and everyone else wants to go watch that as well, when in fact the teacher had a different plan in mind of what was going to happen up there. So there's a different in terms of thinking about that. Another theory is just that there's differences in executive function in people with ASD. So the big idea around executive function is being able to manage oneself and one's resources in order to achieve a goal. So this involves mental control and self-regulation. So all of these processes over here on the right go into having effective executive function, being able to plan, being able to organize, prioritize. A big one a lot of us, I think, see that's impacted in the classroom is the ability to shift. So the ability to go from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity, or even just shifting between two preferred activities can be really difficult for a person on the spectrum. And memorizing and checking. So we often see that people with ASD have real differences in executive function, and this can impact their ability to engage within the classroom. And then another theory around the cognitive profile of autism is weak central coherence. And this means a person on the spectrum may have a very detail focused cognitive style. So they may have difficulty deriving overall meaning from a bunch of things all together. They may not be able to see the big picture. So here in this exemplar, a person with strong central coherence looks at this endless expanse of trees and would say, I see a forest, right? A person with weak central coherence would see only a whole lot of individual trees. So you may have a student in your classroom who is on the spectrum and they're very detail oriented, or will focus on a detail and you'll say, well, this doesn't really feel that important in the scheme of things. So they just have differences in how they're interpreting that information. The other thing that is really important in terms of engagement is response systems. How can a student show what they know? This is really key to figuring this out for students to be able to engage in the classroom. We must be, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second, we must be prioritizing communication and response systems. When I go into a classroom, this is the number one thing I really want to emphasize with teachers. So I just want to share this statistic with you. And it hasn't changed a lot since I've been in the field, which is a long time. I'm getting old. Based on the analysis of the national core indicators, data from 26 states in the US reported that only a small percentage, 8.6% of individuals with intellectual disabilities who have complex communication needs had access to any form of aided or unaided AAC. And just anecdotally, I'm seeing that as well. So that means over 90% of individuals with ASD or complex needs do not have a communication system. It is really hard to engage in your day without a communication system. So Sadie, that could be a whole nother probably hour PD we could do. So I'm not going to spend any more time talking about that, but I just implore you to really think about if you're struggling with engagement with a student in your classroom, do they have a true communication and a true response system? And here are just some exemplars, right? You can just go and print these core boards and laminate them. That'll give some type of opportunity to engage. I am a huge fan of dry erase boards. When I was a teacher, I always had one with me because worst case, right, you just write on there and give them an opportunity to point to their responses. So there are lots of variations. They can be low tech. You don't have to have access to high tech AAC to have a response system. You can use index cards to make choices. There are lots of different ways to do it. I just implore you to really be intentional in thinking about how does your student communicate and how does your student respond in the classroom. Okay, so this is kind of organized across 4 big areas, and I think we hit some of these in the chat, so that is good. I was relieved to see this. Some challenging areas for students with ASD in the classroom. It can be around motivation. The second big idea we're going to talk about are consequences for academic behavior. The third one we're going to talk about is a learning history with an instructor, and then the fourth one we're going to address is a learning history within a setting. In terms of motivation in autism spectrum disorder, strategies that typically improve motivation in neurotypical students are not always as successful for students with ASD. We will see that students with ASD are more likely to refuse to engage with activities that fail to sustain their interests. When I was in the classroom, I was kind of sometimes found their honesty refreshing, right? They would say, I don't know why we're doing this. I don't know why they're doing that in there. And sometimes I was having the same thoughts, right? So, but most of us have socially mediated reinforcement, right? Like, I just want my teacher, Sadie, to be happy with me. So I'm going to go ahead and do it, right? But kids on the spectrum don't always have that, right? They're going to be really honest if they think it's busy work or they don't understand the point of it. So we just need to be really thoughtful about what is motivating students and may have to change how we do things in our classroom to address that. So some things to support motivation in the classroom. We're going to look at choice interventions. We're going to talk about task interspersal, and then we're going to talk about active student responding. These are all interventions that have research and evidence base behind them to increase motivation in the classroom for individuals with ASD. It's a good reason to think about these things. If you build some choice interventions into your classroom, the data shows, research shows that you'll have increased work completion, increased compliance, decreased time to onset of work activity. So that means when I say, hey, go ahead and get started on this writing activity. If there's choice built in, there will be a decreased time from giving the demand to complying with the demand in the classroom, and decreased frequency of inappropriate behavior. So a couple examples of choice intervention. Giving a student choice, and they're controlled choices. So when I say giving a choice of where to sit or what to sit in, you are going to be really intentional about what those two choices are. I mean, they don't mean you can go sit in the library. They don't mean you can leave the classroom, but it might be that do you want to sit on the ball chair or do you want to sit in the cube chair? Do you want to sit in this kind of chair or this kind of chair? Just building some choice into there. Do you want to stand up at your desk while you're doing the work, or do you want to sit down? So controlled choices within the activity are really helpful. Choice of the writing utensil. This seems so simple, but sometimes if I'm like, you know what, sure, you can write with the blue marker instead of the pencil, the kid's like, all right, and they get started on their work. Now, I know we have a couple OTs on here too, right? And so they'll have some feedback on that, but generally, so talk to your OT about what are ideas that sometimes can make it easier. Like writing with a traditional number 2 pencil can be harder than a kid than writing with a marker. So check in with your OTs, right? But sometimes just giving that choice. If sometimes an OT will want you to work with a certain utensil because they're working on building a skill. But if that is not the case, and the point, we just want them to get the work done and they're fine with changing up, offer some choice there. And then another thing is just choosing the order of the assignment. So overall, we're going to talk about having large visual schedules across the day, but also then having embedded schedules within there and allowing them choose the order that they do the work, right? That can give them a sense of control of the situation, and they're getting all the work done. So sometimes as teachers, we can have control issues. I'm a teacher, I'm allowed to say that. And sometimes we just have to be comfortable with letting some things go and say, what is the means to an end here? What do I want to have done at the end of the day? And so letting go of some of that control can just be really powerful. And we don't need to get in a power struggle over certain things across the classroom. Here's an example of a tic-tac-toe choice board. I thought this was kind of cool, and I got it down here from this website if you want to check it out. But they play tic-tac-toe. Your first activity gets an X, the second an O. And so it's kind of building a game into there. Then you need to get 3 X's in a row to be done. So this is just a way to build in some choice, and it's really engaging and fun. So that might be a way to build some choice in for your students. Remember, so this is, I feel like I say this a lot when I'm out in classroom, and this is true for us as well. Motivation changes, and what's reinforcing to someone changes can change across the day. For some people who are really impacted by their autism, it can change across 10 minutes. So what was motivating earlier in the day or the week may not be at a later date or time. So important that we provide choice and frequently check in through the day to see what is motivating to the student. Sometimes, like, when I go and we'll see like reinforcement charts, it's the same as it was in September. And for some kids that works, but for some kids we do need to be implementing new things, thinking about new things. And we're going to talk a little bit about reinforcer and preference assessments. But this is a good time of year to kind of stop and think, like, do I need to go back and do that and change it up? And then also remember, students get satiated on things. So if a kid is motivated by food, and like that may not be that motivating after lunch, right? They're full. So if you're saying, you're going to work for goldfish, at that time, if they just ate, that may not be something they want to work for. So just being mindful and intentional and thinking about that with students and recognizing that motivation will change for students across the day. Okay, the next intervention we're going to talk about is task interspersal. And this isn't that fancy, but it's really effective. And that means interspersing easy tasks throughout instruction with novel or more challenging materials. So the research shows that by alternating between easy and more challenging tasks, the learner will emit a higher rate of successful responses, thus accessing a higher rate of praise and reinforcement. So that means when you're setting up your day, just thinking about things like if you're doing a reading activity, building in things, like easy words with harder words. If you're doing a math activity, interspersing easy facts within the harder facts. And the research shows it'll increase the amount of accuracy as well as compliance with the task. So just think about how your day is set up and how can you build that in. So why task interspersal is so effective in the classroom? They have higher opportunities to access reinforcement. It decreases problem behavior. You have higher accuracy of responses. It increases overall task engagement, and it strengthens mastered skills. So it's just an easy thing to put in your classroom and be intentional about. Just in terms of thinking about what is an easy task. An easy task is someone that they have a probability of correct responding at 80% or higher. When I go into classrooms, a lot of times I will see in independent work things that are actually instructional tasks. And that is just going to lead to frustration for a student if they can't do it independently. So have something at kind of that 80% or higher rate for your easy task. And it's easier when the interspersed tasks are related to each other. So again, like when I was talking about that reading example, like keeping it all within reading tasks that are in there, or if it's math, so just being intentional, it kind of builds some of that behavior momentum, right? So if you're gonna, maybe you're gonna target word problems, in math, starting with some facts, right? And building that behavior momentum and success there. And then maybe going into some of the language around in a word, found in a word problem, then do some more facts, right? And then so just scaffolding that word problem work within those easy tasks in there. So just the research shows that by keeping it within the same subject area, you have more success as a teacher. Okay, and then the third intervention in there is active student responding. So I encourage you to think about, and I see this more in inclusion settings, but I do see it also in more restrictive environments as well, that if teachers will talk for 15 to 20 minutes with little opportunities for students to engage. So you really need to be intentional about how are you going to build in more opportunities for students to respond. So that means a whole or small group instructional strategy that involves providing all students with frequent opportunities to respond and frequent contact with class content. So the two ideas here are choral responding and response cards. The reason you should do this, it gives increased opportunities to respond. You'll have decreased in time and off-task behaviors, less frequency of self-stimulatory behaviors. Some of those students, when I was teaching, right, and I started talking a lot, right, they would be like, well, I'm going to check out and go to that movie in my brain, right, because Mrs. Doyle is really boring right now, right, and you start seeing more of those scripting behaviors because they're having a hard time attending because they don't have opportunity to remain engaged in the content. You'll have higher compliance and then higher frequency of correct responding. So this is all the research shows by increasing active student responses. I was going to show, Sadie, I meant to check and make sure this was going to work when I pull it up. I thought this exemplar of response cards was really great. So I just wanted to see if I can share this real quick. Sadie, can you see that on your end, the video?
I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Let me stop and sharing here and see if I can share.
You might need to click the share sound.
Okay. If this doesn't work, Sadie, it's not going to be a big, it was just a really
And we
nice.
we can get your slides, right?
Yeah,
And I can share those out if you don't
absolutely.
mind. Oh, there it is.
Okay. And let's see if the sound will work.
Oh, maybe not. I don't hear it.
Okay. That's okay. I'll share it in the slides. Not a big deal. This
Okay.
was just, there's 2 exemplars within that video. And the second one is done in a classroom with students with disability. And it's just a really great example of active response. All right, let me go back to sharing my. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes,
Great.
we got it. Mhm.
Okay, so those kind of was in the first. They are just big ideas around motivation. So just in review, if you're struggling with motivation in your classroom, just 3 things to try. You can try choice interventions, task interspersal, and active student responding. Just go kind of sit back and think about, are there areas of your day that you could add that in more, or things that you could change up to increase some of those opportunities for students to increase motivation. Okay, the next big area we're going to talk about are establishing consequences for academic behavior. So we're going to talk about using preference assessments as well as self-management strategies within your classroom. Um, a factor that may influence an instructor's effectiveness is the level of reinforcement that a student receives. For neurotypical students, praise or grades may serve as consequences that adequately maintain behavior. But you'll see, I think a lot of you who have students with ASD in your classroom will agree that students with ASD may be less responsive to socially mediated consequences due to the social differences associated with the diagnosis. So generally, you have to use reinforcement. Um, Intervention specialists are usually pretty open to this idea. Sometimes where we run into some issues is within the gen ed classroom and having those conversations that just, again, they're processing reinforcement different than neurotypical students. You have to have those conversations with gen ed teachers. And again, like I said earlier, you need to conduct those reinforcement and preference assessments regularly to make sure that you're actually accessing that reinforcement for the student. I always say to teachers, and like, we cannot choose someone's reinforcement. I cannot choose Sadie's reinforcement, right? Like whatever she needs to get through the day, I can't choose that. Only Sadie can know that about herself, right? So we need to be really intentional about making sure that it's actually reinforcing to the student. So that's the only way it's going to change behavior for them. Preference assessments are an evidence-based practice that identify potential reinforcers to increase school behaviors. There are many different ways to do this, and it doesn't have to be super technical or super fancy. You can actually interview a student, ask them if they have verbal language to answer it. You can call a caregiver and interview them and say, what does Kate like to do when she's at home? That'll give you a really good idea. Just direct observation of students. just watch them when they have free choice or open-ended opportunities. What are they gravitating to? What do they like to do? That'll give you a really good sense of what students like to do. And then there are more structured methods where you can present two items and just have them point or choose. And if you just Google structured choice preference assessment, tons of sheets will come up to allow you to try it. So we need to make sure that we're doing this on a regular basis within the classroom to make sure that we're really using reinforcement effectively. The second thing, and this is something I always tell my pre-service teachers or students that I work with, that I wish I had been better at when I was in the classroom and using self-management tools and strategies. So self-management requires the student to take an active role in addressing his or her classroom behavior. And I have done now, and since I've been out of the classroom and kind of do when I do more consulting or go into classrooms or some of the work we do at the IDD Ed Center, really had lots of success with self-management with students who even are significantly impacted by their disability. One of my core memories as a teacher is I had a consultant come into my classroom, and I was working with a student who had some pretty challenging aggressive behavior. And we knew that we needed to build more exercise into his day because that's an evidence-based practice to decrease aggressive behavior. And she said, you know what, I want you to target self-management with him. And, and record, we were doing power walking in the gym, doing laps in the gym. And she said, you know what, I want you to self-manage and set a goal. And I was kind of like, okay, sure, I don't think this is going to work. And I'll tell you what, it worked, and it wasn't fancy. We just had a piece of paper on the board, and we started with our goal of walking around 2 times, and we would just up it every week that we wanted to do another lap. And he was so excited to be marking his progress. It was great data collection for me. And, and he could see his progress just in this little, we drew it with markers up there on the board and see his progress. So, and that was the last year that I was actually in the classroom. And so I was like, really became invested that I wish I had done that more when I was out in the classroom. So self-management. So just kind of thinking about some ways that you can include students, right? So you can have self-management goals around engagement, right? So you're going to say to the student, right, like, we're going to start tracking how much you're paying attention in the classroom and try to increase that. The steps here are, you want to identify a target behavior. And you need to have students invested in what they're working on, right? So the other part of this is we're going to tie it to reinforcement. So you're going to identify the target behavior, and then you're going to define that target behavior clearly, right? So whatever that means for that student to increase engagement in the classroom, if we're thinking about that in context, you want to use student-friendly language so they know exactly what you want them to do. And then you're going to select an appropriate self-monitoring tool, right? So like really simple, right? It can just be that it's little blocks that they color in for every minute or 30 seconds that they're engaging in the behavior that you want them to be doing, all the way up to checklists, visual schedules. I've had point systems that are fairly complex. But the point is, the student needs to be able to see themselves and be involved in the tracking behavior. I think what's really interesting about self-monitoring, when you look at the research, that teachers will get really hung up on they were not accurate in how they recorded that. And the research actually shows that the fact that they are just attending to self-monitoring will decrease maladaptive behaviors. So we don't actually have to get that hung up on, because what'll happen is, right, like, it's green if they, stayed in their square in their classroom and raised their hand to talk, if those were the target behaviors. And the kid won't want to put red, right, because they don't want to acknowledge that they didn't do it or whatever reason. But even if they mark it as green, we're still going to see a decrease in those maladaptive behaviors and an increase in those behaviors. So just that being said, in the beginning, when you get started, you don't have to get so hung up on how accurate they were. Just the fact that they're self-monitoring is going to change their behavior. So I think that's really interesting. You are going to teach the self-instruction strategies, and then you're going to set a goal, right? And you need to set an achievable goal. So you're going to take baseline, right? And if the kid is not staying and engaging in the task, like if their baseline is 2 minutes, we are not going to jump up and say they're going to sit for an hour in social studies, right? We're going to choose a manageable goal of perhaps you're going to stay for 5 minutes in the classroom and be engaged. And then that we're going to set that goal and tie that to reinforcement for them. Use consistent reinforcement. Make sure I'm like a broken record on reinforcement, aren't I? Make sure they're meaningful and motivating to the student. Include any visual supports or sensory considerations that'll be helpful for the student. And then we're going to keep increasing the goal as they have success. And then we're going to start fading support for the student so they can do this by themselves. For those of us who started working with young adults and in the transition world, this is one of the most powerful things that we can be teaching to students right now. In our CEASE program, our transition program on campus, we have done a lot of work around self-monitoring, goal setting, and it is just really a powerful intervention and has created lots of behavior change. So I urge those of you who are working in more early childhood and elementary to start doing this now. I think I would have thought this might have been too complex or complicated, but there are really simple ways that you can be doing this in early childhood classrooms, and really just teaching students to focus on goals and adjust plans based on their needs can really just be powerful in increasing engagement for students and reaching goals that they want to make in the classroom. Here's an example of self-monitoring. So the they were monitoring expected behaviors and unexpected behaviors. And then they would just keep track it over there on that point sheet. And self-management is also super helpful for data collection on goals. So it's another reason I really like it. This website has tons of excellent self-monitoring exemplars, and they have it broken up by academics, socially, just tons of examples. So if you want to get in there, and then you can download them all as Word documents and edit them to meet the needs of your students. So I just thought this was a really great website I wanted to share with you around self-monitoring. Okay, so just in review, those were things in terms of thinking about consequences for academic behavior. You want to really look at the reinforcement systems you have in place in your classroom or across the school setting. And you want to think about how can you be implementing some self-management for the students in your classroom? What could those systems look like? The next area we're going to talk about is establishing a positive learning history. So we're going to talk about pairing and prompting and fading. So pairing begins by observing an individual and identifying things that they find enjoyable. And again, just like reinforcement, this is going to vary from individual to individual. And so once we find out what they enjoy doing, you need to start associating yourselves with these activities. So you're going to start actively engaging the person in a preferred activity, offering the preferred items in small amounts so they receive them through our interactions, or just simply sitting next to them and engaging the activity without placing demands, right? Our students get so used to, oh, here comes Mrs. Doyle, right? And Mrs. Doyle comes, she's always making me do work, right? Which can lead then to, I'm just a high demand person. I want to use pairing that in those times I am not placing demands and they're building rapport with me and see me as a pleasurable person within their day. And so I'll suggest this to teachers, and they'll be like, well, this is hard to do. Just if you can, think about how can you implement this in like 2-minute sessions across your day. Can you do this, 3 minutes across the day for 2 minutes? And I promise you'll get a really big bang for your buck, right? Of just not always being I know I would be seen as adversive to a student, and I do not want that to be the case, right? So how can I be intentional about being reinforcing to the student, and what things can I do to engage in the day throughout them? So pairing can really go a long way for students in the classroom. And if you are always the demand person, be thoughtful about how can you change some of that across the day so you can get more engagement from the student. And then the other thing you really want to think about is how are you using prompting and fading and airless learning procedures in your classroom? Airless learning is really helpful in increasing engagement for students with ASD in the classroom. And I had a good video, but when you guys get the slides, you'll be able to watch that. But so there's all kinds of different variations of prompting. And when you're using them in a classroom, you want to make sure that your team is all on the same page in terms of how you're using prompting with that student. But if you're thinking about airless learning, what you're going to do is you're going to present perhaps the student three options, and you're going to say, touch the apple. And you're going to immediately provide a prompt in airless learning. So the student touches the apple, right? And you're going to use prompts that are appropriate for the student's ability and age. And then it really is individualized to the student in terms of what prompts you want to be using. You could be using verbal, physical, visual, or gestural prompts. And that's a plan. I would always have my prompting plans written out in writing. That way I knew I followed them with fidelity. And for airless learning, sometimes you're going to start with a more intrusive prompt because you want them to get it right away. And then with airless learning, they're going to start to have a lot more success, right? All of us do better when we have a lot of success with something, and something that's really hard, right? We don't want to go revisit it. It becomes aversive. So you need to use the strategy more often with kids on the spectrum. And it's not forever, right? Like we're not using airless learning forever. As they start to master tasks, you're going to start to reduce the level of support and prompting that you're providing. And then you want to really use a lot of positive reinforcement, praise, or tokens to motivate the person. So, for students who you are really struggling with engagement, using airless learning is a great strategy to start to increase engagement across the academic day for students. And this is just a really nice video. That's an example that you can watch or share with your staff. So when we're thinking about learning history with instructor, two things. Think about how are you pairing and how are they pairing with other people in the classroom. Give that opportunity to all your staff in the classroom to have pairing opportunities, because we want the student on the spectrum to feel successful with multiple staff across the school day. And then really think about your prompting within the day. Are there areas that you could be using more prompting for the student to be more successful with tasks? And the thing with I saw one of our undergrads, Quinn is here. Quinn had a really great comment in there about learned helplessness. Prompts are important. Equally as important is how are you going to fade that prompting system. Sometimes we're really good about putting the prompts in, and then we're not as good about taking a step back and saying, how am I going to start to fade that out? Because our goal is always independence for all students. Okay, the next we are going to talk about is the learning history with the setting. So in terms of increasing engagement, we're going to think about two interventions. We're going to think about schedules and structure, and then we're going to think about priming. So these are two things you can think about to increase engagement. Visual schedules and structure. A visual schedule is a series of pictures or words that are used to represent ordered tasks or steps within an activity. Visual schedules can be very long and binders, or they can be very simple, right? And just a short amount of pictures. It really varies depending on the student needs. The schedule can visually track each activity as it's been completed. Some students will use check boxes, and we're going to have some exemplars here coming up. They might actually pull it off, right, and take it to the activity that they're going to. Schedules are really important because they help decrease anxiety for a student. Students who have executive function differences really struggle with time and understanding that something's going to end. They might really think, and this is actually not specific to students on the spectrum. This is for any student who have executive function difference. They might have like an ADHD label, ADD label, anxiety. I laugh, like I still use a paper-based planner. And I lost it one week and I was so disoriented. I need to look at my whole day, my whole week, and know what's coming for the week. Students on the spectrum are the same way. They need to be able to see, like, they need to see, okay, writing instruction with Miss Kate is going to end, right? And after that, I get to go to recess, right? So it just gives them a sense of what the day is going to look like, and understanding it decreases anxiety for them. In structured learning environments, so this is just kind of a pyramid of thinking about visual supports. We're going to talk a little bit about just the overall physical organization of your classroom can help with engagement. And then the next level is looking at visual schedules, then individual work system, and then specific task organization or other things you can think about to increase engagement. When a student walks into a classroom, it is really helpful if they can understand what the expectations are that are expressed with the physical organization or boundaries within the environment, right? It is not always that intuitive for students on the spectrum who walk in to understand exactly what each space is used for in the classroom. So things you can do, right, to help them understand what happens in certain spaces in your classroom. Helps them predict expectations of the environment. And we're going to talk about some different areas that can be in your classroom to help convey these ideas to students on the spectrum. In the physical environment, you want to have clearly defined the activities that are going to happen. So in my classroom, I had a spot that was for independent work. So the students knew when I go in there, I was going to work independently. I had a spot, I called it teacher time, or it was one-on-one work. So they knew when they came to that table with me that that's what they were going to do. And that was always the expectation there. You want to have a group time that's really clear, like those U-shaped tables are really nice to convey that we're going to be working in a small group. The U-shaped tables also help if the teacher's in the center, they can understand like that's who I should be paying attention to right now. So by being really intentional about your space, it helps students understand what the expectations are, and then you're going to have increased engagement. By defining areas, you're teaching expected behaviors. Like I said, when you have a teacher space, they understand in this space I work with Miss Kate. When they go into independent work, I understand that I work on my own. So think about your classroom and think, are these things very clearly defined in my classroom? For those of you who are in inclusion settings, we can pick up the structure and put it right in a regular gen ed classroom as well. And I'll say when I've done this work, it is not only students on the spectrum who appreciate that level of structure, right? It's really helpful to a lot of students to have that structure in the classroom and the physical environment. So physical environment, we're just going to have some examples of what to do and what not to do. This one's clear, right? It's easy. It's just when you come over here, it's really attractive. There's limited options on what to engage in. Over here, this would just be really hard to increase engagement, right? Because it's kind of a mess. Where do I even start? Where do I even sit? So I got to call out some of us Pinterest teachers. Um, Sometimes you need to be really thoughtful about the environment and the amount of sensory stimuli that are available to students. A student on the spectrum may walk into this classroom and be really overwhelmed because there's so much to attend to. And remember, when we go back to we're talking about those cognitive profiles of students on the spectrum, if they have weak central coherence, there are lots of details to focus on in this classroom, and they may be focusing on a detail that is not important to their instruction or learning. So sometimes it's a hard conversation to have with teachers about really being intentional about what's in your classroom, and things on your walls should really be learning tools that are available to all students. They always shouldn't be there just because they're cute, right? So just having an honest conversation about looking at your classroom and singing how much sensory stimuli is in there, what colors am I using, is it overstimulating to some students, and what are some things I can do to reduce that stimulation, or set up my classroom to be really sending the message of what is important for students to be focusing on and learning tools in the classroom. So here, this is a great exemplar. You can look here and see it's very clear. There's different sections of the classroom. The chairs clearly communicate how many students are going to be there. I mean, there's just far less decoration in the classroom for students to be distracted by or to be providing additional stimulus in the classroom. Here, this is another example of probably like a more early childhood student, early childhood classroom here, but you can see clearly like this is going to be independent work time. It also decreases, it provides a space where students have decreased access to stimuli so they can really be focused. And you can pick up these little workstations and put them into gen ed classrooms successfully. Here's an example. These are weight chairs. These are really helpful for transition times. We were talking about at the beginning that students on the spectrum often have a hard time shifting between activities, right? So if you can have these spaces, these weight chairs, sometimes people will do it in weight chairs. Other people will do it, they'll go back here, like they'll go back to their work desk center to transition. But any of those buffers you can build in for them to kind of take a second, and I call it like switching tabs. Like in my brain, I always picture it as my browser's open, I have multiple tabs, right? What do I need to do to switch to that next tab and give them a second to go ahead and make that transition? If it's a highly preferred activity, sometimes it's harder to transition. So give them a second to self-regulate, readjust, and get ready for the next task. So this is one way to do that in the classroom. Here's example of visual schedules. Some students are just at a first then, right? They're not ready to see the entire day. So even if you can just start with a first then for a student, like first you're going to do your math stations, right? And then you get choice time, can be really successful with increasing engagement for students. Like telling them math isn't going to last forever, right? Maybe setting a timer and, we're going to do math stations for 15 minutes and then you get your choice time or whatever their baseline is to be successful. And this is an exemplar over here of a student who could have a little more information in terms of knowing what the day is going to look like. Here's an example of an individual match to color picture. So this student, so this circle time picture here would be in the circle time area, and they would use that to transition and put it over there. Goodbyes at the end of the day. So when they're leaving for the bus, they're going to carry that with them and take it with them too. Just helps them, again, do that cognitive shifting that's required for engagement across multiple activities in the classroom. Some students need an object schedule, right? So generally the hierarchy goes when you're thinking about schedules, you might start with actual objects, right? And what would represent that for the student. Next, you're gonna go to miniature objects. Under that, you're gonna use photographs. And then you can go to more symbolic representations. But just a word of caution is that when you're using like board maker pictures, or more symbolic representations, not all students are going to understand that's what that means. So make sure when you're thinking about the schedule for a student that you're really thinking about what is their level of understanding, and do you need to go back a little bit and be using actual photographs or objects for the students to understand what those transition items mean for them. I hear when I was talking about those more symbolic representations, you know, kind of that puzzle, right? If you don't, they might not exactly understand what that means. So just making sure that that symbolic representation is powerful to them. And then here is having a mini schedule. This is going to increase engagement again, just showing them how the task is broken down and scaffolded, right? So once you do 3 tasks, you're going to be all done here and building this system. Kind of having these generic 1, 2, 3s are really helpful because you can put them across the day with multiple activities. You can carry this into a gen ed setting and have 3 tasks, right? But anything you're going to do, it's going to increase engagement if they're able to see the beginning, middle, and end of a task and when they're going to be done. All right. And then the second thing I just want to talk about was priming. Priming refers to preparing someone for the particular activity prior to going, right? So for my students, I did work with several students on the spectrum who were fairly included across the day. And every day they would come down to my classroom and we would just talk about all of the assignments that they were going to do that day, right? So it would be in social studies, you're writing a persuasive essay. And remember, we had the graphic organizer here. We have some sentence starters in there for you. Then in math, you're going to be talking about fractions, right? So just priming them for their day and reminding them of the tools that they have available in there. Also, those of you who are familiar with the get it, got it done strategy, and if you just Google that, that's an excellent way of priming. It shows students what the finished product is and helps them understand, again, what the end of the task is. Students on the spectrum or students who have or who are neurodiverse often just think something's going to take forever. They can't understand like there's a beginning, middle, and end to a task. So anything you can do to get them ready to understand what the end product is going to be, you're going to have a lot more success within the day for them. So it's easy. It can just be priming. You can prime someone, but right before they go to an activity and tell them what they're going to do. For some students, like I said, for some students, I could just check in the morning and tell them that these were the things that were going to happen across the day. That requires collaboration and planning with the gen ed teachers. So you know what those are going to be, but that just can be really successful in setting students up. So in terms of kind of thinking about those challenging areas and learning history with the setting, go back and look at your classroom and look at the structure in your classroom and look at the visuals in your classroom. And then also think about how could I maybe pulling in some more priming to set the student up for success prior to heading out to an activity or a class. All right. So those are kind of just four areas I was thinking about you can think about in terms of targeting engagement with students. It is about 4:20. I know we have some more time. I'm happy to answer any questions that you think might be helpful for the good of the group. Here is my contact information. If you'd like to reach out, I'm happy to always chat with you as well, if that would be helpful.
That was great, Kate. I do have a question. Um, for the pairing strategy, is the point of that to build like a trusting relationship with your student so that, okay.
Yeah, yeah. You need to really like I would recognize with some students I was a busy intervention specialist, right? And I had to get my specially designed instruction in, right? And every time Sadie saw me, right, I was high demand,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, oh, Miss Kate came adversive. So I just needed to be more intentional with building in those pleasurable activities, right? So they don't always see that same person as high demand across the day. In a ideal world, we'd have that happen with gen ed teachers too, right? Like a student on the spectrum will be able to go and just do a favorite activity with the gen ed teacher, particularly if that class is really challenging for them. I know like a lot of times writing can be really hard, so how can they go in and spend a couple minutes with the ELL teacher talking about their favorite thing or just doing a preferred activity? But that little bit of pairing and rapport building can really go a long way in changing challenging behavior.
Yeah, makes sense. I wish I did more of that when I was a teacher.
Yeah,
Darn
yeah.
it.
And again, yeah, like don't just
Yeah.
any of these, like choose something and do it in a manageable chunk, right? Like do some of that self-management
Hmm.
and say, you know what, I'm going to set a goal that I'm just going to connect with Quinn, 3 times for 2 minutes across the day and just see, right? And see if there is a change in engagement or behavior. But like 6 minutes of my day is a manageable thing that I feel like
Hmm.
I can do. So do some of those same self-management strategies on yourself and just try. This was a lot of information. So just choose maybe one that resonated with you and give it a try.
I am going to put a couple things in the chat while people might be thinking of a question. I'm putting in the flyer for this 3-part RAAC training series. So Kate kicked it off. I didn't do a very good job. I just realized, like, when I said hello and welcome. So this is a 3-part series, all focused on compassionate interventions to support engagement and learning. So I put that flyer in the chat, and the next one is next week with Dr. Christy Carnahan. Should be also just as informative and great. And then Dr. Alyssa Henry, all special ed faculty here at UC, and they are just, I'm so thankful for them to share this time with us. And also, so I should have said this before, but I am the director of the Regional Autism Advisory Council, RAAC. And last semester in the fall, I kicked off this training series, and kicking it off again this spring. And what I'm trying to do are some mini series like we kicked off today. So this is definitely, maybe geared a little bit more towards the educator or teacher, but honestly, I think these strategies can be carried out into everyday life as well. So for caregivers and other people who support people with ASD or IDD, I think we're just trying to provide opportunities to keep learning and to improve quality of life. So that is what we're doing here. And I'm going to put one other thing in the chat. It is a brief survey. If you could take just a few minutes to complete this. We, meaning me, I'm just always trying to improve what we do in RAAC and with the IDD Education Center. So if you have a few minutes and you can answer the questions in the survey so we can improve what we're doing. And also, if you're looking to get some CEUs, please also include your email address, and I will email you a certificate for getting CEUs, which is great. So I will stop talking. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to shout out or put it in the chat.
I have one question.
Hi, Quinn.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to talk about a student that I'm a para in their classroom, and I was wondering how to initiate that as my role as a para, because I was thinking about the strategy of having a designated, maybe slightly secluded space for the student, which he doesn't have any sort of place. He's just kind of all over the classroom, runs around and stuff like that. He doesn't have a designated space for him. How do I initiate that as a para?
Yeah. Great question, Quinn. I mean, you can always say, hey, I went to this training yesterday and this idea was in there. What do you think about it? I think that's always a nice jumping off point. And like, we'll share the slides with you. Yeah, I mean, that is having a structured classroom is an evidence-based practice. So you should feel confident in talking about that. So I think that might just be a nice springboard to say, hey, I had this, you think we could try something? Always offering as the pair to collect some data to see if you see a change in engagement or behavior is always helpful to an intervention specialist as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Good question.
I'll mention it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that would be tricky, but yeah, I mean, you probably definitely have to approach it as like a team initiative within the classroom. Yeah. But even trying something, I mean, Kate gave a lot of really small little chunks of strategies, like just starting off small, I think would be a great idea too.
Okay.
Well, great. Thank you, everybody. This was such a great training. Thank you again, Kate, for your time. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and I will be in touch via email with some of this information. Take care, everyone.